Well, folks, they say every dog has his day, and mine came when I had to block that ambulance on Drayton Street. Name's Scout, and I reckon it's time I told you the whole truth about what happened that October afternoon in Savannah. See, everyone thinks I'm just some stray mutt who got lucky. But that ain't the half of it. The truth is, I've been carrying a secret heavier than a sack of Georgia peaches, and it's about time I come clean. They call me a hero now, but heroes don't usually start their stories standing over a man they helped put in the ground. Well, not literally in the ground, mind you, but close enough. You see, before I saved Bill McKenzie's life, I helped destroy it. And that's a confession that'll curl your toes tighter than Sunday shoes. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Let me paint you a picture of how things used to be, back when Bill McKenzie was still the man I knew him to be. Bill lived in one of those grand old Victorian houses on Jones Street. You know the type, with wraparound porches and Spanish moss hanging like nature's curtains. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, he'd shuffle out in his worn leather slippers, coffee mug in hand, talking to his late wife Martha like she was still sitting in that wicker chair beside him. "Morning, Martha Rose," he'd say, same as he had for 53 years. "Looks like it's going to be another scorcher." Of course, Martha had been gone 3 years now, but Bill never did accept that particular truth. I'd been living in the storm drain behind Forsyth Park for 2 months when I first caught sight of him. Something about the way he carried himself, shoulders back despite his age, that military bearing you never quite lose, reminded me of the handlers I'd worked with during my search and rescue days up in New York. See, that's the part most folks don't know about me. Before I became just another street dog scrounging for scraps, I was FDNY Search and Rescue Unit, K9 Badge number 247. Spent 3 months in the rubble after September 11th, looking for survivors, then bodies, then just pieces. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Point is, Bill McKenzie had that same look in his eyes that I'd seen in my handlers. The look of a man who'd seen too much but kept going anyway. Every evening, he'd walk the same route down Bull Street to Madison Square, around the monument twice, then back home, rain or shine. That man walked his beat like he was still on patrol in the Mekong Delta. His daughter Sarah Beth would visit every Sunday, driving up in her shiny BMW with Colorado plates. Always looked like she was dressed for a court appearance, which, being a lawyer in Denver, she probably was half the time. But there was something about the way she looked at that house, like she was measuring it for something. And the way she'd check her watch during their conversations, like she had somewhere better to be. "Daddy, you really should consider moving to one of those nice retirement communities," she'd say, same speech every week. "This house is too big for you now." But Bill would just smile and pat her hand. "Sweetheart, this house holds 53 years of memories with your mama. I ain't leaving till the good Lord calls me home." That's when I should have known. Should have smelled the trouble brewing like a Georgia thunderstorm. But I was too busy trying to figure out why this old man's evening walks always ended with him sitting on a bench, staring at the empty space where his wife used to sit, whispering apologies to the Spanish moss. As my old trainer used to say, a good search dog knows when something's buried. A great search dog knows when something's been buried on purpose. I just didn't know I'd be digging up the truth about myself. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday in May. Bill was out on his porch at dawn, talking to Martha's empty chair about the weather and whether the azaleas needed watering. I was watching from my usual spot under the magnolia tree across the street when Sarah Beth's BMW pulled up earlier than usual. Way earlier. It wasn't even 7 in the morning, and she never showed up before noon on weekdays. Something was rotten in Denmark, as my old handler used to say. Sarah Beth climbed out of that car like she was walking into a courtroom. All business and sharp edges. But there was something different about her that morning. A tension in her shoulders. The way she kept checking her phone, how she fumbled with her keys at the front door. I've spent enough time around humans to know when they're about to do something they shouldn't. "Daddy," she called out, her voice carrying that fake sweetness lawyers use when they're about to stick the knife in. "I brought you some of those pralines you like from that place in Denver." Bill's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Well, ain't you thoughtful? Sweetheart, come on up here and sit with your old man." I watched Sarah Beth climb those porch steps, and something in my gut twisted. Maybe it was my old training kicking in, but I could smell fear on her. Not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that makes you do terrible things. She set a white bakery box on the wicker table and started fussing with the ribbon. "I also brought you some coffee from that fancy place you mentioned," she said, pulling out a thermos. "French roast. Just how you like it." Now, I may be a dog, but I'm not stupid. Bill Mackenzie had been drinking the same Maxwell House coffee for 30 years. Never touched anything fancy in his life. Said it was good enough for the Army, good enough for him. But there he was, accepting that cup like it was communion wine. "You're too good to me, Sarah Beth," Bill said, taking a long sip. "Your mama would be so proud of the woman you've become." That's when I saw it, just for a split second. Sarah Beth's mask slipped. The look that crossed her face wasn't love or pride. It was calculation, cold as January morning and twice as sharp. I started moving closer, using the garden hedges as cover. My old training was screaming at me that something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Bill seemed fine, chatting away about the neighbors and the weather, working his way through those pralines and that coffee. Then it happened. About 20 minutes in, Bill's words started slurring, just a little at first, like he was getting tired. Then his hand started shaking, and that coffee cup went tumbling off the porch, shattering on the brick walkway below. "Daddy," Sarah Beth's voice was all concern now, but I could smell the lie on her. "Are you feeling all right?" Bill tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. I don't feel so good, sweetheart. Must be this heat." But it wasn't hot that morning. Cool as a cucumber. Actually, Sarah Beth was already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling 911. You just sit tight, Daddy." I crept closer, close enough to hear her side of the conversation. "Yes. This is Sarah Mackenzie Powell. I need an ambulance at 412 Jones Street. My father appears to be having some kind of medical episode. He's 77, has a history of heart problems." Bill didn't have any heart problems. I'd been watching him for months. That man had the constitution of a mule and twice the stubbornness. When the ambulance arrived, Sarah Beth was the picture of a concerned daughter. Tears in her eyes, holding Bill's hand, whispering reassurances. but I was close enough to hear what she was really saying. "It's okay, Daddy. You're going to a better place now. Mama's waiting for you." The paramedics loaded Bill onto that stretcher, and he was barely conscious. As they rolled him toward the ambulance, his eyes found mine through the hedge. For just a moment, they cleared, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Recognition. He knew what was happening to him. "The dog," he whispered, so soft only I could hear it. "Watch. The dog." Then they had him in the ambulance, and Sarah Beth climbed in beside him, still playing the devoted daughter. As they pulled away, sirens wailing, I followed on foot as far as I could. But a German shepherd can only run so fast, and ambulances don't wait for witnesses. I made it to Savannah General about an hour later, panting and desperate, found a spot under a loading dock where I could watch the emergency entrance. Sarah Beth came out after 2 hours, and her tears had dried up mighty quick. She was on her phone again, and this time she wasn't bothering to whisper. "Yes, it's done," she said. "He collapsed this morning. The doctors are saying it looks like a massive stroke, brought on by his age and stress." No one saw anything. I was the only one there." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "The house, I'll put it on the market next week. The insurance money should clear by the end of the month. 2.3 million, just like we planned." My blood ran cold as morning frost. Insurance money, like we planned. This wasn't grief. This was a business transaction. Sarah Beth hung up and walked to her car with the satisfied air of someone who'd just closed a big deal. As she drove away, I caught something else in the air, a scent I'd been trained to detect back in my search and rescue days, the scent of a particular kind of sleeping medication, the kind that could slow a man's heart down to nothing if you gave him enough. That's when it hit me like a Louisville slugger to the head. I hadn't just witnessed an old man having a medical emergency. I'd watched a daughter murder her father in broad daylight, and not a soul in the world suspected a thing. "Don't count your chickens before they hatch," my trainer used to say. But Sarah Beth Mackenzie Powell was already spending her inheritance, and her daddy wasn't even cold yet. I spent that night outside the hospital, listening to the sounds of life and death echoing through those walls. Somewhere inside, Bill Mackenzie was fighting for his life, probably not even knowing his own daughter had put him there. And me, I was just a stray dog with knowledge I couldn't share and a conscience that wouldn't let me walk away. That was the night I decided that being a hero sometimes means getting your paws dirty, even if it destroys you in the process. Now here's where I gotta come clean about my own part in this mess, and it ain't pretty. See, I've been telling you this story like I was some kind of innocent bystander, but the truth is, I was played like a fiddle from the very beginning. And the worst part, I helped that woman nearly kill her own father, and I didn't even know it until it was almost too late. It started about a week after Bill got rushed to the hospital. I was still camping out near the emergency entrance, hoping to catch sight of him, when Sarah Beth showed up with a bag of what looked like the finest dog treats money could buy. Premium stuff, the kind that comes in fancy packaging and costs more than most folks spend on their own dinner. "Here, boy," she called out, her voice all honey and sunshine. "You look hungry." Now, I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and those treats smelled like bacon and heaven rolled into one. My stomach was growling something fierce, and my better judgment went right out the window. She tossed a handful on the ground near the loading dock, and I wolfed them down without a second thought. "That's a good boy," she said, scratching behind my ears like she actually cared. "You've been watching over Daddy, haven't you? Such a loyal dog." I should have known right then that something was off. This was the same woman who'd never so much as acknowledged my existence during all those Sunday visits. But hunger makes fools of us all, and I was barking up the wrong tree if I thought free food came without strings attached. Sarah Beth started showing up every few days with those treats, always with that same sweet talk about what a good dog I was, how much she appreciated me keeping vigil for her father, and every time I ate them, I'd get drowsy, real drowsy, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes you sleep for 12 hours straight. I thought it was just exhaustion catching up with me. After all, I'd been running on adrenaline and scraps for weeks, made perfect sense that good food would make me sleepy. But looking back now, I can see the pattern clear as day. Every time Sarah Beth fed me, I'd conk out for hours. And every time I woke up, I'd have these gaps in my memory, like pieces of time had just been carved right out of my head. The first time I really noticed was on a Thursday morning in June. I remembered Sarah Beth giving me treats around 10 in the morning, and then nothing until I woke up at nearly midnight. 14 hours, gone like smoke. But here's the kicker. When I came to, there was a strange car parked behind the hospital that hadn't been there before. A white sedan with rental plates, and 2 men in suits loading something into the trunk. I tried to get closer, but my legs were still wobbly from whatever had been in those treats. By the time I could focus properly, the car was pulling away, and all I caught was a whiff of that same medicinal smell I detected on Sarah Beth the morning Bill collapsed. That's when the pieces started falling into place. Slow as molasses, but twice as sticky. See? I'd been wondering why Sarah Beth was being so kind to a stray dog. Lawyers like her don't usually waste time on charity cases unless there's something in it for them. And there was something else bothering me. Every time she showed up, she'd ask the same questions. "Have you seen anyone else around here? Boy? Any other people asking about Daddy?" She was pumping me for information, though at the time I thought she was just making conversation. But dogs are natural observers, and even drugged up, I was still noticing things, like how she always checked to make sure the coast was clear before those men in suits showed up, like how she'd time her visits for when the hospital staff was changing shifts. The worst part was realizing that I'd become her unwitting accomplice, while I was knocked out on whatever cocktail she'd been feeding me. Sarah Beth was using my presence as cover. Who's going to suspect a grieving daughter of foul play when there's a loyal dog keeping vigil? I was her alibi, her prop, her perfect cover story. "Look at that sweet dog," I'd heard the nurses say. "He's been here every day since the old man was brought in. Dogs know, you know. They can sense when their people are in trouble. If only they knew that this particular dog had been drugged senseless while his person was being slowly murdered just 50 feet away." I started putting the timeline together in my foggy brain. Every gap in my memory corresponded with a change in Bill's condition. The first time I lost those 14 hours, Bill had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. The second time, his doctor had mysteriously adjusted his medication. The third time, there'd been talk of transferring him to a long-term care facility. Each time I woke up from my forced naps, Bill was a little further away from recovery, and a little closer to whatever grave Sarah Beth was digging for him. The guilt hit me like a freight train. Here I was, supposed to be some kind of search and rescue hero, and I'd been snookered by a woman with a bag of drugged dog treats and a smile that could fool the devil himself. I'd failed in the most basic way possible. I'd failed to protect the one person who needed protecting most. But the worst was yet to come, about 3 weeks into this nightmare. I woke up from one of my enforced naps to find a transfer van pulling away from the hospital. Through the back window, I caught a glimpse of an old man on a stretcher, and even from a distance, I knew it was Bill. Sarah Beth was standing by her BMW, talking on her phone with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. "Yes, the transfer went smoothly," she was saying. "Sunset Manor has excellent security, very private, no visitors without family approval, and I'm his only family now." She paused, listening. "How long? The doctor says maybe 6 months, given his condition. Could be sooner if we adjust his medications. No investigation needed. It's clearly a case of advanced dementia brought on by the stroke. Very sad. But these things happen." That's when it hit me full force. I hadn't just been a witness to attempted murder. I'd been an accessory. Every time I'd accepted those treats, every time I'd provided her with cover, every gap in my memory had been another nail in Bill Mackenzie's coffin. I was played like a fiddle. All right. And the tune Sarah Beth had been playing was a funeral march. Standing there in that hospital parking lot, watching the tail lights of that transfer van disappear into the Georgia night, I made myself a promise. I might have been fooled once, but I wasn't going to let that woman finish what she'd started, even if it meant digging up every buried secret between here and Colorado. 2 heads are better than 1, as they say, and that's how I came to meet Eleanor May Hutchinson, the woman who'd been watching this whole mess unfold from her kitchen window at 414 Jones Street. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd noticed something fishy about Sarah Beth's sudden devotion to her daddy. I was skulking around Bill's empty house 3 days after the transfer, trying to figure out how to get to Sunset Manor, when I heard a soft whistle from across the street. There was this tiny woman, couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, standing on her porch in a flowered housecoat and fuzzy slippers, holding a plate of what smelled like bacon. "Come here, sugar," she called out in a voice that sounded like sweet tea and steel magnolia all rolled into one. "I've been watching you keep vigil, and I reckon we need to have ourselves a little chat." Now, after my experience with Sarah Beth's drugged treats, I was mighty suspicious of anyone offering me food. But there was something about Eleanor Hutchinson that put me at ease. Maybe it was the way she moved, slow and deliberate, like someone who'd learned patience the hard way. Or maybe it was the fact that she didn't try to coax me over with baby talk and fake sweetness. I crossed that street cautious as a cat in a doghouse. But when I got close enough to really look at her, I saw something that stopped me cold. This woman had the eyes of someone who'd seen plenty of trouble in her 82 years. But more importantly, she had the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime helping people. Gentle hands, with calluses that spoke of hard work and service. "I know what you're thinking," she said, setting that plate down on her bottom porch step. "Another human trying to drug you into submission. But honey, I've been a nurse for 47 years, and I didn't retire to start poisoning dogs." She sat down in her rocking chair and pulled out what looked like a photo album. "Besides, we've got bigger fish to fry. That Mackenzie girl has been up to no good, and I've got the proof to back it up. The bacon was real bacon, not some fancy treat. And while I ate, Eleanor started flipping through page after page of photographs. But these weren't family snapshots. They were surveillance photos. Pictures of Sarah Beth's car in Bill's driveway at odd hours. Pictures of those men in suits loading boxes into their white sedan. Pictures of Sarah Beth on her phone, taken with what looked like a telephoto lens. Started taking these about 6 months ago, Eleanor said, her voice matter-of-fact as Monday morning. Something about that girl never sat right with me. Too polished. You know, like she was always performing instead of just being. She flipped to a page that made my fur stand on end. There was Sarah Beth, clear as day, standing in Bill's kitchen with a small glass vial in her hand. The timestamp showed it was from the morning Bill collapsed. "Caught her dumping something in his coffee pot," Eleanor continued. "Took me 3 weeks to figure out what it was. But I've got connections at the hospital lab, digoxin, heart medication that's perfectly safe in small doses, but deadly if you give someone too much." I stopped eating and stared at that photo. There it was, proof of what I'd suspected all along. But how was an 82-year-old retired nurse getting evidence that the police had missed? Eleanor must have read my expression, because she chuckled and scratched behind my ears. "Honey, you think 47 years in the ER doesn't teach you how to spot the difference between natural illness and foul play? I've seen every kind of poisoning, overdose, and accident you can imagine. When Bill McKenzie got rushed to my old hospital with symptoms that didn't match his medical history, I knew something was rotten in the state of Georgia." She pulled out another photo. This one showing Sarah Beth meeting with a man in an expensive suit outside a bank downtown. "This here's Marcus Webb, estate attorney, specializes in what they call expedited probate. Basically, he helps people cash in on dead relatives real quick, like. No questions asked." The pieces were falling into place faster than autumn leaves. "That meeting happened 2 days before Bill's stroke," Eleanor continued. "I followed her there myself. Amazing what you can hear when you're just an old lady sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons." She flipped to the back of the album, where she documented Sarah Beth's visits to Sunset Manor. "Been tracking her movements ever since they transferred poor Bill. She shows up every Tuesday and Thursday, always with a briefcase, always staying exactly 1 hour, and every time she leaves, the staff has a little more cash in their pockets." The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. Sarah Beth wasn't just trying to kill her father, she was paying the nursing home staff to help her do it. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree," Eleanor said, her voice turning bitter. "That girl learned from the best. Her grandmother, Bill's mother-in-law, died under mysteriously convenient circumstances about 10 years ago, right when Sarah Beth was going through that expensive divorce in Colorado." She showed me a newspaper clipping from the Denver Post. "Josephine Carter, 89, died peacefully in her sleep at Sunrise Assisted Living, left her entire estate to her granddaughter, Sarah Mackenzie Powell, $500,000. Right when Sarah Beth needed it most." I felt sick to my stomach. And not from the bacon. This wasn't Sarah Beth's first rodeo. She'd been practicing elder murder for years, and now she'd perfected her technique on her own father. "But here's the kicker," Eleanor said, pulling out a manila folder thick as a phone book. "I've been documenting everything for the past 4 months. Every visitor to that nursing home, every medication change, every mysterious adjustment to Bill's treatment plan. And I've got allies inside." She opened the folder to reveal detailed medical charts, photocopied prescriptions, and what looked like internal memos from Sunset Manor staff. Turns out, not everyone at that place is on Sarah Beth's payroll. There's a night nurse named Patricia who's been keeping track of every suspicious thing that's happened since Bill arrived. Eleanor leaned forward in her rocking chair, her eyes sharp as broken glass. That girl thinks she's clever, but she's made one crucial mistake. She assumed that because her daddy's old and confused, nobody would care enough to investigate. She didn't count on a nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands and a lifetime of medical training. She stood up and walked to her front door, then turned back to face me. Question is, Sugar, are you ready to help me save Bill McKenzie's life, because time's a-wasting, and that woman's getting bolder by the day? I looked at those photographs spread out on the porch, then back at Eleanor's determined face. This tiny woman had been fighting Sarah Beth's conspiracy single-handed for months, documenting crimes that the authorities had missed completely. 2 heads are better than 1. All right. And sometimes one of those heads belongs to a dog who's tired of being played for a fool. Time's a-wasting, as Eleanor liked to say, and over the next 3 months, we developed what you might call an unlikely partnership. Every morning at sunrise, I'd make my way to her back porch, where she'd have coffee brewing and a plate of eggs waiting. While I ate, she'd spread out her surveillance photos from the night before, and we'd piece together Sarah Beth's latest moves. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you sure can teach him how to be a better spy. Eleanor had me positioned at different spots around Sunset Manor throughout the week, watching for patterns in Sarah Beth's visits. Turns out, that woman was as predictable as Sunday church, every Tuesday at 2 p.m. and every Thursday at 10 a.m., like clockwork. Consistency's the downfall of every criminal, Eleanor would mutter, marking times and dates on her calendar. They think routine makes them look innocent, but it just makes them easier to catch. The nursing home sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by live oaks dripping with Spanish moss. From my hiding spot behind the maintenance shed, I could see straight into the lobby through the big picture windows, and what I saw made my blood run cold as winter morning. Sarah Beth wasn't just visiting her father. She was running the place like she owned it. I watched her hand envelopes to the head nurse, saw her in deep conversation with Dr. Millbrook, the facility's medical director. Every staff member she talked to walked away with something in their pocket, and the look on their faces said it all. Fear mixed with greed. The kind of expression you see on people who know they're doing wrong but can't afford to stop. But the worst part was watching what happened to Bill during those visits. Eleanor had convinced her friend Patricia, the night nurse, to let us know when Sarah Beth was coming. Patricia would call Eleanor with a coded message, "The azaleas need watering," and I'd race over to watch through the windows. Bill's room was on the first floor, and through the gap in the curtains, I could see everything. Sarah Beth would arrive with that same fake smile, that same briefcase, and that same small thermos she'd used to drug his coffee months earlier. She'd sit beside his bed, playing the loving daughter for anyone who might be watching. But her hands were always busy. I saw her switch his medication bottles when the nurses weren't looking, watched her dump pills into her purse and replace them with different ones from her briefcase, saw her add drops from a small vial to his water pitcher, the same calculating expression on her face that I'd seen the morning she poisoned him. And Bill. Poor Bill was deteriorating before my eyes. Each week, he looked smaller, more confused, more like a shadow of the proud man who used to talk to Martha's empty chair every morning. His skin had turned gray as old newspapers, and his hand shook so bad he could barely hold a cup. But here's what really got to me. Every time Sarah Beth leaned in close to whisper something in his ear, I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew, somewhere deep in his foggy mind, Bill Mackenzie knew his own daughter was killing him, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Eleanor's intelligence network was growing by the week. Besides Patricia at the nursing home, she'd recruited 2 orderlies, a janitor, and even the kitchen supervisor. Turns out, healthcare workers don't like seeing their patients murdered any more than the rest of us do. They just needed someone brave enough to organize the resistance. Money talks, Eleanor explained during one of our morning briefings. But conscience talks louder when you give it a chance. The evidence was piling up like cordwood. Patricia smuggled out copies of Bill's medical charts, showing how his medications had been changed without proper documentation. The kitchen supervisor provided records of special dietary supplements that Sarah Beth had been bringing in. The janitor found the empty vials in Sarah Beth's briefcase, which she'd been careless enough to leave unattended during one visit. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Dr. Millbrook's secretary, a mousy woman named Janet, who'd been with the practice for 20 years, finally got fed up with being asked to falsify medical records. She started making copies of everything: prescriptions that didn't match the patient files, death certificates that had been pre-signed, insurance forms that listed causes of death before the patients had actually died. "Look at this," Eleanor said one morning, spreading Janet's latest delivery across her kitchen table. Pre-printed death certificate for William Mackenzie, dated for next week. Cause of death: natural causes due to advanced dementia and heart failure. My stomach dropped to my paws. Next week. Sarah Beth was planning to finish the job next week. Eleanor was already reaching for her phone. "We've got enough evidence to bury her 10 times over, but we need to move fast. That woman's not going to wait much longer." But when she called the sheriff's department, we hit our first real snag. Deputy Morrison, who took the call, listened politely to Eleanor's explanation, and then delivered the kind of response that makes you lose faith in the system. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but Mr. Mackenzie is under professional medical care. His daughter has legal power of attorney, and according to his doctors, he's suffering from advanced dementia. Sometimes family members have to make difficult decisions about end-of-life care." Eleanor's face went red as a Georgia sunset. "End-of-life care. That woman is poisoning her father." "Do you have any physical evidence of poisoning? Any witnesses willing to testify under oath? Any proof that isn't based on speculation and photographs taken without permission?" That's when we realized the full scope of what we were up against. Sarah Beth hadn't just bought off the nursing home staff. She'd covered her legal bases, too. With power of attorney and a compliant medical team, she could do whatever she wanted to her father, and the law would back her up. "We're on our own," Eleanor said after hanging up the phone. "The system's rigged in favor of people like Sarah Beth, educated, wealthy, respectable. Nobody wants to believe a successful lawyer would murder her own father for money." But Eleanor May Hutchinson hadn't survived 8 decades by giving up when things got tough. She spent the rest of that day making phone calls to contacts I didn't even know she had. Retired cops, investigative journalists, even a private detective who owed her a favor from back when she'd saved his life in the ER. "If the law won't help us," she said. her voice carrying the steel that must have gotten her through 47 years of saving lives. "Then we'll have to save Bill McKenzie ourselves." Time was running out, and we both knew it. Sarah Beth had scheduled her final visit for the following Thursday. After that, there wouldn't be enough left of Bill McKenzie to save. We had 6 days to pull off a miracle, and all we had was a pile of evidence nobody wanted to see, and the determination of one old nurse who refused to let evil win on her watch. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's all you need. Between a rock and a hard place doesn't begin to describe where I found myself that Thursday morning, 2 weeks before what would become known as the ambulance incident. Eleanor had gotten word from Patricia that Sarah Beth was making an unscheduled visit to Sunset Manor, and something about the urgency in that phone call made my fur stand on end. "She's got a new briefcase," Patricia had whispered into the phone. "Bigger than usual. And she's asking for complete privacy with her father. No interruptions, no wellness checks, nothing. Says she needs to discuss end-of-life arrangements with him." Eleanor's face went white as fresh cotton. We both knew what that meant. Sarah Beth wasn't planning to wait until next week. She was going to finish the job today. I ran to Sunset Manor faster than I'd ever run in my life, my paws hitting that pavement like bullets. When I got to my usual spot behind the maintenance shed, Sarah Beth's BMW was already in the parking lot, and through the lobby windows, I could see her talking to Dr. Milbrook with an intensity that made my blood freeze. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't content to just watch from the shadows. I circled around to the back of the building, where the staff break area had a door that was usually propped open for deliveries. The hallway beyond led straight to Bill's room, and if I was careful, I could get close enough to see exactly what Sarah Beth was planning. The corridor smelled like disinfectant and despair, with undertones of that medicinal odor I'd learned to associate with Sarah Beth's poisoning cocktails. I crept along the baseboards, staying low and quiet, until I reached the partially open door of room 127. What I saw through that crack in the door will haunt me until my dying day. Bill was awake, more alert than I'd seen him in months, and he was staring at his daughter with a clarity that suggested his mind had temporarily cleared from whatever fog she'd been keeping him in. Sarah Beth was sitting beside his bed, that new briefcase open on her lap, and she was holding what looked like a large syringe filled with clear liquid. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Daddy," she was saying, her voice carrying none of the fake sweetness I'd grown accustomed to. This was the real Sarah Beth, cold, calculated, and completely without conscience. "But you're suffering, and it's time to let you go be with Mama." Bill's voice was weak but steady. "You think I don't know what you've been doing to me, Sarah Beth? You think these old eyes don't see?" She paused, syringe halfway to his IV line. "Daddy, you're confused. The doctors say what you pay them to say." Bill's words cut through her lies like a hot knife through butter. "Just like you paid them in Denver when you killed your grandmother. Just like you're paying them here to kill me." For a moment, Sarah Beth's mask slipped completely, and I saw the monster underneath. Grandma Josephine was old and useless, just like you. At least her death served a purpose. It paid for my divorce and got me back on my feet. Your death is going to do even better. $2.3 million. Daddy, enough to set me up for life. And Martha's ring. Bill's voice was getting weaker, but his eyes burned with righteous anger. "The one you stole from my bedside table, planning to pawn that too, Sarah." Beth laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "That old thing I sold it months ago. Got $15,000 for it. Not bad for a piece of sentiment." That's when I saw something in Bill that I hadn't seen since the morning he collapsed on his porch. Fight. Pure, stubborn, military-trained fight. His hand moved slowly toward the call button beside his bed, but Sarah Beth was faster. "I don't think so, Daddy." She grabbed his wrist and pulled his hand away from the button. "We're going to finish this conversation without interruptions." She held up the syringe again, and in the hallway light, I could see it was filled with enough liquid to kill a horse, let alone a weakened old man. "This is morphine, Daddy, enough to stop your heart in about 30 seconds. The autopsy will show that you died peacefully in your sleep, overwhelmed by the progression of your dementia." "You won't get away with this," Bill whispered. But we both knew he was wrong. She'd gotten away with it before, and she'd get away with it again. "Who's going to stop me?" "Sarah." Beth positioned the syringe at his IV port. "Eleanor Hutchinson. That old busybody doesn't have any real evidence. The police, they think you're a confused old man with dementia. Your loyal dog friend animals don't make very good witnesses in court." That's when I realized she knew. She knew about Eleanor's investigation, knew about my surveillance, knew about all of it. And she didn't care because she was right. Nobody would believe us. And by the time anyone tried to investigate, Bill would be dead and buried. I was trapped between watching a murder happen and being powerless to stop it. If I burst into that room, Sarah Beth could claim I was a dangerous stray attacking her elderly father. If I ran for help, Bill would be dead before I got back. The devil, you know. Indeed. But then something unexpected happened. As Sarah Beth pressed the syringe toward his IV line, Bill's other hand, the one she wasn't holding, moved toward something on his bedside table. A small digital recorder that I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind his water pitcher. "Confession's good for the soul," he said quietly, and pressed the record button. Sarah Beth froze. "What the hell is that?" "Patricia brought it to me yesterday," Bill said, and for the first time in months, I heard strength in his voice. "Told me Eleanor Hutchinson had been investigating you, and if I wanted to help catch you, I needed to get you talking. Turns out, villains really do like to monologue." The color drained from Sarah Beth's face as she realized what had just happened. Every word she'd spoken, the confession about her grandmother, the admission about the insurance money, the detailed description of her murder plan, all of it was now recorded on a device that was probably streaming directly to Eleanor's phone. "You senile old fool," she snarled, lunging for the recorder. But Bill was ready for her. 77 years old, weakened by months of poisoning, barely able to sit up in bed. And he still had enough fight left to knock that syringe out of her hand. It hit the floor and shattered, spreading morphine across the linoleum like spilled death. Sarah Beth's carefully controlled facade finally cracked completely. "You've ruined everything," she screamed, loud enough that half the nursing home probably heard her. "I needed that money. I deserved that money." That's when the cavalry arrived. Patricia burst through the door, followed by Dr. Millbrook and 2 orderlies. Behind them came Eleanor, moving faster than I'd ever seen an 82-year-old woman move, and behind her, Sheriff Morrison himself. "We heard everything," Eleanor announced, and holding up her phone. "Live stream, just like we planned." Sarah Beth looked around that room like a cornered animal, and for a moment I thought she might try to run, but there was nowhere to go, and she knew it. The devil you know had finally been caught in her own web of lies. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it takes a stubborn old man, a nosy neighbor, and a dog who refuses to give up. Truth will out, as they say. And boy, did it ever come pouring out that October afternoon when I finally got my chance to be the hero I was trained to be. But first, let me tell you what really happened in that nursing home room after Sarah Beth got caught red-handed. Sheriff Morrison slapped those handcuffs on her wrists while she was still screaming about how ungrateful her father was, how she'd sacrificed everything for the family, how the money was rightfully hers anyway. The woman had completely lost her mind. Or maybe she'd just finally shown her true colors. But here's the thing nobody expected. Bill McKenzie wasn't nearly as far gone as everyone thought. Turns out, once they stopped pumping him full of Sarah Beth's poison cocktail, his mind cleared up faster than morning fog in Georgia sunshine. Within a week, he was sitting up in bed, asking for his clothes, and demanding to know when he could go home. Been awake and aware for months, he told Eleanor during one of her visits. Had to play possum, you understand. Only way to catch that girl in the act was to let her think she was winning. That old soldier had been running his own counterintelligence operation right under his daughter's nose. Every confused mumble, every blank stare, every moment of apparent dementia had been an act designed to make Sarah Beth overconfident, and it had worked perfectly. Eleanor was beside herself with admiration. Bill McKenzie, you sneaky old coot. Here I thought I was saving you, and you were saving yourself all along. Couldn't have done it without you. Eleanor May, he said, reaching over to pat her hand. That surveillance of yours gave me the proof I needed that I wasn't losing my mind. Sometimes a man needs to know he's not crazy before he can pretend to be. But the real revelation came when Patricia brought in Bill's complete medical files from before Sarah Beth started her poisoning campaign. Turns out this whole thing had been going on a lot longer than any of us realized. Look at this, Patricia said, spreading the charts across Bill's bedside table. Your blood work from 8 months ago shows traces of digitalis. That woman's been slowly poisoning you since last Christmas. 8 months. Sarah Beth had been planning this murder for 8 months, slowly building up the toxins in her father's system, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the killing blow. And she almost got away with it. The investigation that followed was like watching dominoes fall. Once Sarah Beth got arrested, Dr. Millbrook started singing like a canary in springtime, trying to save his own skin. Turns out, he'd been falsifying medical records for Sarah Beth for months, in exchange for cash payments and promises that he'd be her personal physician once she inherited Bill's fortune. But the biggest shock came when the FBI got involved and started digging into Sarah Beth's background. Remember that grandmother in Denver? I mentioned Josephine Carter hadn't died of natural causes after all. Exhumation and modern toxicology tests revealed the same pattern of slow poisoning that Sarah Beth had used on her father. Serial killer, Sheriff Morrison told Eleanor during one of his updates. That's what we're dealing with here. This woman has been murdering elderly relatives for over a decade, and she's gotten very good at it. They found evidence linking Sarah Beth to at least 3 other suspicious deaths: an uncle in Phoenix, a great-aunt in Santa Fe, and her own mother-in-law back when she was still married. Each death had netted her a substantial inheritance, and each had been written off as natural causes due to the victim's age and health conditions. "She's been running a family extermination business," Eleanor said, shaking her head in disgust. "Picking off the old folks one by one, collecting insurance money and inheritances like some kind of ghoulish lottery." But here's where my part of the story gets interesting again. See, while all this investigation was happening, I was dealing with my own revelation about what I really was and why I'd been so drawn to Bill Mackenzie in the first place. Eleanor had been curious about my background ever since we'd started working together, and she'd made some calls to her contacts up in New York. What she found out explained everything about why I'd been able to sense the danger around Bill, why I'd known something was wrong even when I couldn't put my finger on what it was. "Scout," she said one morning, showing me an official-looking document, "you're not just any search and rescue dog. You're FDNY, Search and Rescue Unit K9 Badge, number 247, reported missing in action 3 years ago during a building collapse in Manhattan." The memories came flooding back like a dam breaking. I remembered my handler, Captain Rodriguez, getting trapped under debris while we were searching for survivors. Remembered staying with him for 2 days until the rescue teams found us. Remembered the surgery, the rehabilitation, the gradual realization that my working days were over due to a damaged hip. But most importantly, I remembered my specialized training. I hadn't just been taught to find people trapped in rubble. I'd been trained to detect medical emergencies by scent, heart attacks, strokes, diabetic comas, even certain types of poisoning. It was an experimental program, using dogs' incredible sense of smell to identify people in medical distress before visible symptoms appeared. That's how I'd known Bill was in trouble months before his collapse. That's why I'd been drawn to watch him so closely. My nose had been detecting the chemical changes in his body caused by Sarah Beth's slow poisoning, and my training had been screaming at me that this man needed help. "Every dog has his day," Eleanor said, scratching behind my ears. "And yours was the day you trusted your training enough to block that ambulance." Which brings me to that October afternoon that started this whole confession. By then, Bill had been moved back to his own house, with Eleanor checking on him daily and me serving as his official live-in companion. He was getting stronger every day, his mind sharp as a tack, his body slowly recovering from months of systematic poisoning. Sarah Beth was in jail awaiting trial, facing charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Dr. Millbrook had lost his medical license and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sunset Manor was under federal investigation, and half their staff had been arrested. But Bill still needed medical monitoring, and he'd insisted on staying in his own house rather than going to another care facility. "I've had enough of institutions," he said firmly. "If I'm going to recover, I'm going to do it in the house where Martha and I built our life together. That's why there was a visiting nurse coming by that day. That's why there was an ambulance in the neighborhood. And that's why, when I caught the scent of medical distress coming from somewhere it shouldn't be coming from, every instinct I'd ever been taught told me to block that ambulance's path and lead them to the real emergency. Because sometimes the best way to save someone's life is to remember who you really are and trust that your training will guide you to where you're needed most. Truth will out, indeed. And sometimes the truth is that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, even ones with 4 legs and a nose for trouble. Home is where the heart is. And 6 months after that ambulance incident, I finally understood what that old saying really meant. Bill and I were sitting on his front porch in the evening light, watching the Spanish moss sway in the breeze, when he reached over and scratched behind my ears the way he'd been doing every night since I'd officially become his dog. "You know what? Scout," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in over a year. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for what happened. Not for Sarah Beth trying to kill me, mind you, but for everything that came after." I understood what he meant. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us clear the way for the best things. Every cloud has a silver lining, as Martha used to say, and Bill had started quoting his late wife more and more as his memories of their life together came flooding back, no longer clouded by his daughter's poison. The trial had been a media sensation, lasting 3 months and making national headlines. "Daughter poisons war veteran father for insurance money" was how most papers covered it. But those of us who lived through it knew the real story was about something deeper. It was about family, the kind you're born into versus the kind you choose. Sarah Beth had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, a stern woman in her 70s, had looked down at that defendant's table and delivered words that still gave me chills. "You have violated the most sacred trust our society recognizes, the bond between parent and child. You turned love into a weapon and care into murder. You will spend the rest of your life contemplating the depth of your betrayal." But the trial had also revealed something beautiful. While Sarah Beth had been systematically destroying her father, a whole community of people had been quietly working to save him. Eleanor, Patricia, the orderlies at Sunset Manor, even Dr. Patterson from the hospital, they'd all risked their jobs and reputations to do what was right. "Blood is thicker than water," Bill said one evening as we watched the sunset, "but love is thicker than blood." Eleanor had become a permanent fixture in our lives, stopping by every morning for coffee and staying for dinner most nights. She'd sold her house across the street and moved into Bill's guest room, claiming it was just temporary until she found her own place. That was 4 months ago, and neither of them seemed in any hurry to change the arrangement. "At our age," Eleanor would say with a wink, "temporary might just mean the rest of our natural lives." They'd found companionship in shared purpose. 2 old souls who'd discovered that taking care of each other was what they'd been missing all along. They'd garden together in the mornings, Bill working the soil while Eleanor planned what to plant. They'd cook together in the afternoons, Eleanor teaching Bill recipes that Martha had never mastered. And in the evenings, they'd sit on that porch and tell stories about the old days, when life was simpler but somehow harder at the same time. But the biggest surprise came when Bill announced that he wanted to start a foundation in Martha's memory. The Martha Rose Mackenzie Foundation for Elder Safety, he called it, dedicated to training healthcare workers to recognize signs of elder abuse and providing resources for elderly people who felt isolated or vulnerable. "Can't bring Martha back," he told the reporter from the Savannah Morning News, "but I can make sure other folks don't go through what I went through." Eleanor had volunteered to help run the foundation, using her decades of medical experience to develop training programs. They'd already partnered with 3 nursing schools and 2 medical colleges, teaching students how to spot the warning signs of elder abuse that the system had missed in Bill's case. And me, well, I'd found my new calling too. Turns out, my nose for detecting medical emergencies was still as sharp as ever, and there was a demand for dogs who could identify health crises before they became life-threatening. Bill and I had started working with the local fire department, training new search and rescue dogs to detect medical distress the way I'd been trained years ago in New York. "You're not just saving lives," Fire Chief Williams told me during one of our training sessions. "You're teaching others how to save lives." That's the kind of legacy that lasts. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Bill and I would go to the fire station where a new group of young dogs would be waiting to learn what I had to teach them. Bill would work with their handlers, sharing what he'd learned about reading a dog's signals, while I'd demonstrate how to identify different medical scents and led rescue teams to people in distress. The program had already saved 6 lives in its first 4 months of operation. 6 families who still had their loved ones because a dog had been trained to trust its nose, and a rescue team had been trained to trust the dog. Not bad for an old German shepherd who'd lost his way and found it again. But the most rewarding part of our new life was the quiet moments. Bill reading his newspaper in the morning while I lay at his feet, Eleanor humming while she cooked, filling the house with smells that reminded me of comfort and safety. The 3 of us watching old movies on Sunday afternoons, Bill and Eleanor sharing popcorn while I dozed on the rug between their chairs. "You know what I realized?" Bill said one evening as we sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight. "I spent so many years talking to Martha's empty chair, telling her about my day, asking her advice. I never realized that what I was really doing was talking to myself, trying to figure out how to keep living without her." He reached down and scratched my head, something that had become our evening ritual. "But having you and Eleanor here, having people to take care of and people taking care of me, that's not about replacing Martha. That's about honoring what she taught me about love." Eleanor came out onto the porch carrying 3 glasses of sweet tea, setting one down within Bill's reach and scratching behind my ears before settling into her own chair. "Martha would have loved this," she said, gesturing at the peaceful scene around us. 3 old souls taking care of each other. 2 old souls and 1 middle-aged dog, Bill corrected with a laugh. "Let's not age Scout prematurely." As the stars began to appear overhead, I thought about the journey that had brought us all together a year ago. I'd been a lost dog with a guilty conscience, watching a good man slowly die while feeling powerless to help him. Bill had been isolated and vulnerable, slowly being murdered by the one person who should have protected him most. Eleanor had been a lonely widow with too much time on her hands and too much love in her heart with nowhere to direct it. Now we were a family, not the kind that's born from blood and obligation, but the kind that's forged from choice and commitment, the kind that proves love doesn't have an expiration date, loyalty doesn't have conditions, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on someone who needs you. "Every dog has his day," Bill murmured as the night settled around us. "But the luckiest dogs get to have a lifetime of them." I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle creaking of the porch swing where Bill and Eleanor sat side by side, their quiet conversation mixing with the sounds of evening and savannah. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint wail of a siren. Another emergency, another chance for someone to be a hero. But for now, I was exactly where I belonged. Home is where the heart is, and my heart was right here with the family I'd chosen and who had chosen me back. Sometimes that's all any of us really need. Someone to come home to, and someone who's grateful we made it back safely. Dear friends, Scout's story reminds us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when life gets hard. How many of us have felt forgotten by our own children, worried about becoming a burden, or wondered if anyone would notice if we just disappeared? Bill Mackenzie faced the ultimate betrayal, yet found his greatest blessings in the most unexpected places: a loyal dog, a caring neighbor, and the courage to start over at 77. This tale hits close to home because it reflects our deepest fears and greatest hopes. We fear being vulnerable, being taken advantage of, losing our independence. But we hope for genuine connection, for someone who sees our worth, for love that doesn't come with conditions or expiration dates. Eleanor, at 82, proved it's never too late to matter to someone. Bill discovered that surviving doesn't mean just breathing. It means finding purpose, building new relationships, and refusing to let bitterness win. Scout's journey from guilt to redemption mirrors our own struggles with second chances. We've all made mistakes, felt lost, wondered if our best days were behind us. But this story whispers a beautiful truth. Our most meaningful chapters might still be unwritten. The foundation Bill created, the lives Scout continues to save, the family they built from choice rather than obligation. These weren't consolation prizes for getting older. They were the rewards of staying open to love, even after betrayal. Your golden years don't have to be about shrinking or settling. They can be about expanding, serving, discovering that wisdom and experience are superpowers, not limitations, like Bill and Eleanor. You have knowledge that younger generations need, like Scout. You have instincts honed by decades of living. The question isn't whether you still matter, it's how you'll choose to matter. Every sunset can be followed by a new dawn. Every ending can become a beginning. Every loss can teach us what truly deserves our love. Scout blocked that ambulance because he refused to give up on what mattered. What will you refuse to give up on? Share your thoughts. What unexpected friendship or second chance has blessed your life after 50? Have you ever been the Scout in someone else's story? The one who showed up when they needed help most? Your experiences could inspire someone who needs hope today. Please leave a comment below and let's celebrate the beautiful ways life surprises us with new purposes and deeper connections.